Today we're talking about PR and storytelling. It's probably the hottest topic for the last number of years in public relations, and something that came up in Humanities Week earlier this week was that regardless of the career that you go into, you're always going to be a storyteller. You're initially going to be a telling your own story to the world, to get hired, to employers, to internship managers, things like that. And then for many of you, the storytelling will never stop. So storytelling, because humans are storytelling animals, it is a consistent theme that you will be dealing with. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. Angela, I'm going to start with you. How do you tell powerful stories that move people as a PR practitioner?
That's a great question. And I think when it comes to storytelling, a lot of what you need to convey to your publics and your audience is truth and humanity, right? So I think brands are very driven to talk to the consumer in a way that says, buy me, try me, love me, like me. But they don't really pull the curtain back. They don't really explain to the consumer who they are. So even not from a non-branding perspective, and I also dabble in nonprofit, when you're trying to convey stories of humanity, how can we relate to audiences, right? You need to really kind of boil it down to, obviously ethos, right? How can we tug on people's emotions, right? How can we draw them in through storytelling? I think that's a very powerful tool. Many of you know, I worked for a nonprofit outside of here. I worked for a homeless shelter in Myrtle Beach. And when it comes to storytelling to drive donations to the shelter, right? That's a huge, powerful tool. And you have to do it ethically. You have to represent people's story from the correct perspective, right? You have to break stereotypes sometimes. And you have to give people motivation and a reason why, right? Why should I care? Why does this problem affect me and my own kind of insular viewpoint and life, right? And it's a similar approach from the private sector, right? You're trying to engage that audience. But storytelling is the tool that really builds that connection and builds that bridge. And I talk about this in class a lot of brands where you understand who they are, what they represent, what they believe in. It builds that connection to the brand. And then you have a stronger affiliation to that brand as a consumer, public, donor. So storytelling is super powerful. And I think as PR practitioners, it's especially important that we help guide those stories. I think it's easy for CEOs of companies to say, this is what we want to say, but you really have to work hard to craft the right message. And sometimes the message that the CEO wants, it's not going to hit with the audience, right? Because again, it's maybe profit driven. It's not about building a relationship. So storytelling at PR, it's a long-term process. It's not just a quick pitch, a quick hit, like, advertising, like buy me, try me, love me, like I said earlier. So super important.
That's great. I love that answer. I love truth, how truth relates to audience, how storytelling relates to education, particularly in the nonprofit area like you mentioned. Also, I'm going to tie these next two questions together because they're both about ethics. And I think that's difficult for students to really feel as students versus when you're in the workforce and your paycheck is like your ability to be able to pay the rent and your car payment, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to ask Angela about what does it feel, what does it mean to have a strong moral compass as a PR practitioner kind of on a day-to-day basis. Then we'll follow up with James looking at ethics and empathy guiding public relations leadership during moments of crisis. So we'll start with Angela and we'll kick it over to James.
When it comes to ethics, we have been talking a lot about this for those of you in my PR class, and the buzzword has been transparency, right? So again, like Bob said, you can be working corporate side and your own moral compass might have a little bit of a red alert sometimes. Like, I don't know if this is, like I said earlier, the right story to tell. And you need to know who you are ethically, because like Bob said, it isn't just about collecting a paycheck. It's about believing in what you're representing. And I think that's so important from a PR perspective. I did work corporate side for so long. And making the shift into nonprofit, at least for me, was very eye-opening because I feel at the end of the day that what I'm doing makes an actual difference and it's contributing. But I definitely think, again, like transparency is that buzzword that I continually use. Consumers are savvy. The public is savvy. They know when they're being lied to. It's not easy to sweep information under the rug in the age of information technology we live in. So again, I think, bad practice always comes back. PR can be used as a tool to, hide, mask, deter. And personally, I never felt like that was the right purpose for PR. It shouldn't just be used for spin and lying and unethical practice. So you have to be careful, I think. Like I said, I use politics as an example. There's a lot of people who work in politics, and I'm not going to say every political message is jaded or tinted or doesn't have, a true ethical or moral backing. But again, you've got to work with your moral compass. Is that for you? Is this for me? Do I believe in this message? And as a practitioner, you need to push back sometimes. And that's the hard part. And you work for someone, for sure.
Wonderful.
Cool. All right. So I'm going to start with just picking up from what she just said. In terms of ethics, when I look at ethics, especially during crisis communication, you have to think about it as something that sets the boundaries on what you're going to say. In other words, you're looking at what is right, what is wrong. And now, during crisis, there's always the pressure to deliver a message immediately, or because of speed, people are anxious to know what did the organization do, what is happening, and they're also interested in knowing what is the organization doing to prevent this crisis from happening again, or basically what we call psychological needs of the people that are affected by the crisis. So ethics sets the boundaries for that because it helps the leaders especially, or the people who are delivering the messages, to know what they need to say, or what are the boundaries that they don't need to cross, especially when they are communicating with the people, with the publics that are affected by the crisis. Because you're thinking of it from a perspective where you're not looking at what do people want to hear, but you're thinking of what is responsible as an organization to do during periods of crisis. And this is all about avoiding things like scapegoating or denying or pushing blames to other people. Because once you start going that direction, then people are going to start thinking, okay, then what's the responsibility of this organization, especially when it comes to this crisis? Now, that's the aspect of setting the boundaries. Now, when it comes to empathy, has to do with how the message is being delivered. Because when you think about empathy, you're thinking of who are the people that have been affected by this crisis and what would be the message that would be resonating to them. You don't want to stand there in front of media and then start talking about your organization as the one that is, suffering, rather than looking at the people that have already been affected by the crisis as it is. So we're thinking of the people that are affected first, and because what we do in PR and in crisis communication is we always believe that once you're able to handle the psychological needs of the people that are affected by a crisis, the reputation of your organization kind of gets fixed automatically, because people feel like the organization cares about us. Therefore, we're going to reciprocate that by showing our interest in maybe buying products from this organization, or supporting it in terms of needs and when they need anything from us. So, tying them together, you can think about how ethics helps set the boundaries, and then empathy, how the message is being delivered, and that builds trust between the people and the organization that is being affected or that has been affected by the crisis.
It's fantastic. Thanks, James, for following up there. What habits or mindsets help practitioners stay grounded in human values when the stakes are so high? The life almost of the organization is on the line.
That's a good question. So I think one thing that comes to mind is slowing down. During crisis, you don't want to stand there and then just issue all the information that you have or what you think about the crisis, because there's a lot of uncertainty during crisis. Maybe you don't have all the information that is needed to be shared out there. And sometimes it's always advisable to deliver this information in snippets or fragments. Go issue a press briefing or a statement and then observe what's the public reaction to this message. And that is going to determine now the next message that we're supposed to deliver as an organization. So you don't want to go there and then blast people with all this information, because that can lead to information overload. And we try as much as you can to avoid stressing people, especially when they're already stressed by the crisis that is happening in the organization. So, and that helps a lot, especially when by making the organization become more proactive rather than reacting to the crisis itself. Then centering more on the people and the reputation of the organization. I think the most important aspect of an organization during crisis is the people. Once you care for the needs of the people, it becomes easy, and like I mentioned, for you to think about the reputation of that organization, and also looking at different perspectives or seeking diverse perspectives when it comes to like what are the publics thinking. Maybe you may think, I will give an example of COVID-19. You find that it was affecting different populations differently. So if you go there, you issue a press briefing and you're only focusing on like one population, then it becomes difficult for the other people who don't belong to that population to start thinking, wait, have you forgotten about us? Are we not, human enough to be also featured in whatever you're talking about? So there's that aspect of centering the message on people and seeking diverse perspective. And lastly, when I think about all that is making sure that you remember the purpose of the organization, not the end goal of that organization. Remember, as an organization, there's always the old saying that the customer is always right, and the customer is the most important person who visits our premise. So when you think about all those perspectives, then centering everything on the people, then it becomes easy for you to fix or whatever you want to fix, because you're able to instruct the publics or the people that are affected by the crisis what they need to do to protect themselves. And again, you're also able to tell them what we are doing as an organization to make the crisis go away.
Okay. Before we move on, Candace or Jeff, do you want to add anything to your thoughts about crisis communications or ethics?
I'd like to pick up on ethics just for a moment.
Yeah.
I tell my students that at some time in any situation, you're going to be faced with some ethical dilemmas. And I always encourage you to know what your ethics are before you put yourself in that situation. I was brought back many, many years ago when I was transitioning from the Navy. I was offered a job at a PR firm in Atlanta. And the job was to accommodate smokers in restaurants. This was before they had the no smoking ban. And I thought it was a good job. It was good money. But I thought about it and I said, ethically, I don't believe in it and I don't want to encourage others to do it. And so I turned that job down. And that's an extreme example, but often you have to think about what your ethics are going to be and what you represent. And to James's point about knowing what the organization does, that's also really important, is what is the organization's ethics? And are we stepping over the organization's ethics line by saying something we shouldn't or ignoring something that we should talk about? So ethics are very important for our business.
And I would say to that from two perspectives, from the PR perspective and the journalism perspective, because I have both of those sides. When you know as a reporter that an organization that you're covering has traditionally been honest, and they have that ethical component, you know that the story that you're getting is one that you can feel comfortable in then giving to your audience, because that's your reputation on the line. So when you're working with an organization and you feel like there's more to the story, you're really waiting on that source to give you that information. You have to trust that they're giving you honest, true information. And then sometimes from the reporter side, ethically it's a story that you then feel compromised in covering. But for me then crossing over to PR, what that allowed me to do is then see, okay, as a PR practitioner now, what do I need to think about ethically so that I can give the reporters and the media the story that they need, that I know they'll feel comfortable with? Because I know now I have more information than my corporation or organization is going to let me actually give out. So, what do I really need to be sending out into the community? What's important for them to know? Like you guys know, we have a potential storm on the horizon. Right now, there's a lot of organizations trying to figure out ethically what do we share at this point so that we don't make people worry. So it's both sides in journalism and PR, so it's a unique perspective, but the ethics have to drive everything that you do.
It's great. Yeah, I have to jump in because I'll tell you about what Dr. Ranta said about your personal ethics and understanding where your worldview sits. When I was younger, I was recruited, was living in San Francisco, and I was called by an executive recruiting firm and they were going to buy me a car and give me a down payment for a house and backed a Brinks truck full of money up to my desk and were going to dump it on me. But my job was going to be to lead the layoffs. This was one of the 5 biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world. I was going to run U.S. communications. And the job was to announce and run the program for 45,000 layoffs at this company. That was going to be the first thing I did. I was going to be the face of the layoffs nationally for all those employees who had never seen me before and had never met me before. And it was tempting because it was a lot of money. It was more money than anybody in my family had probably made in their entire adult lives. And I woke up one night in a cold sweat. I ethically could not do it, despite a money figure that was astronomical. Sometimes I wonder. But you got to be, you have to be ethical. You have to, you can't give your best effort in something you don't believe in. And it just didn't fit. So it is important. Candace, you already hit on this great point. You've been on both sides, both sides of the fence, traditionally a little bit combative, but that's less so now. I think people are bouncing back and forth. We've all been journalists, right? As well? Okay. I wouldn't consider myself as hard. I'm just a freelance writer. Candace has actually been on TV reporting the news. Anybody else? You've been a newscaster? Just other? Yeah, we've all done journalism. So you have this interesting perspective. There are journalists in our program, PR practitioners, people are thinking about those careers. What advice can you give future journalists and PR professionals about building relationships that are mutually respectful without crossing ethical lines?
So it's a good question because relationships are how you're going to earn your stories as a journalist, and as a PR practitioner, relationships are how you're going to get coverage. So it's mutually beneficial to have good relationships. So I covered hard news in this area, meaning I covered what are considered top story: shootings, carjackings, fires, hurricanes, all the stuff that you typically see at the top of a newscast. So my sources were who I had to have relationships with. So the police departments, the municipal government agencies, and you guys are hearing the word PIO in a lot of your classes. Those are public information officers, and those are the PR practitioners that I worked with when I was working in news. So establishing relationships is really important, but what you have to be really careful of is not crossing the line in your relationships. A lot of reporters will actually be friendly outside of work with their practitioners that they work with because they work in the same circles all of the time. So I'll give you a good example. You have to know ethically, again, it brings it back up, when maybe the relationship has gotten too close and when you need to back away, because it could cause you the inability to cover something appropriately as a journalist. Your emotions might be too involved. There was a time when I was covering Myrtle Beach police in this community, and the public information officer and the team that he worked with us in the news, I got to know really well. And you run in the same circles in a small town, so you have to be really careful to keep your professional position and then your personal position separate. But I actually had a source of mine that I worked with very closely be killed in the line of duty. He was a police officer in Myrtle Beach. He was shot and killed downtown Myrtle Beach, and I actually had to walk into my news director's office after the first live shot. I was the first reporter on scene. I didn't know it was him, and it really wrecked me on air that day, and I knew I had to go to my news director and say, I cannot cover this story anymore because I'm too close to it, so you have to know. And from the PR perspective, you also have to understand journalists have a job to do. Just because you have a good relationship with a journalist doesn't mean that they're not going to have a story that's really spicy that they need to cover that's probably going to put you in a tough spot now as the public information officer or the PR representative of a company. You may have that relationship, but you have to be able to remember the boundary to understand they still have a story to cover, and there's going to come a time where they've got to ask you a tough question, and you're going to have to answer it in an ethical way that you can, but you can't get upset that they're coming to you now and trying to cover your company and you've been friends. That has to go out the window. There has to be a line. So you want to have a good relationship also too, in the sense that if you are close, sometimes they're going to give you more information than you should probably know about. You need to understand that boundary and know what's coverable and what's not coverable. I'll give you another example. I was very close with the coroner's office. I got to know them because I worked with them very closely. I told you I was covering murders, and I was covering car accidents with fatalities and big investigations. I got to know the coroners really well, so it wasn't uncommon for them to come up and say hello on a scene. Well, to another reporter, that looks like, well, why are they coming and talking with her, but they're not talking with us? But it's because when I called them in the morning and did what are called beat calls, I didn't just call and say, hey, what's the update on the body? Do you have a cause of death? I would say, hey, how are you? How are your grandkids? What's going on? You know, I got to know them personally, but I didn't abuse that relationship. I was really careful about that. But relationships are everything in any industry, but specifically in PR and with media. When you're working for a large organization, you're working with regional and national media, you're not going to have the same relationship that you would have in a local market like this, just because this is smaller. It's easier to have those relationships.
Damn, it's great. My colleagues recently started a public relations student society of America, which is the student version of Public Relations Society of America, which is a national organization with tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of members. I was a member in San Francisco, and we would have the meetings on the 57th floor of the Bank of America Tower. So if you can picture the San Francisco skyline in your mind, it's the largest building, largest brown building. And they would serve drinks. It was during lunch, so it was wine and hors d'oeuvres and cocktails. And so one time our speaker was from Hewlett-Packard. He was the head of corporate communications at Hewlett-Packard, and he had too many drinks. And so he gave his talk that he had written out, but then people started asking him questions because Hewlett-Packard is one of the largest companies in the Silicon Valley area, very important company. And he started going down a different path and started telling stories about the CEO. What nobody realized, there were about 100 people in the audience, was like, that person over there happened to be a reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle who just didn't stand up and say, hey, I'm a reporter. You really think you should be saying these things? And then, was it within 10 minutes, 5 minutes? It was ridiculous. Within some very short time frame of the meeting ending, the story was on the electronic edition of the San Francisco Chronicle. And the next day, Hewlett-Packard stock dropped 10 points. See, essentially, his remarks were so awful about the CEO, and then Wall Street got panicky about the leadership team because Hewlett-Packard had a series of bad CEOs, that it wiped out millions of dollars of value, tens of millions of dollars in value in that company just from one bad interaction, the way that Candace is talking about it. So you've maybe seen on television shows where somebody goes, this is off the record. That doesn't exist. There's no such thing as off the record.
Yes.
If a reporter has a story to tell, they're going to tell it.
Like a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
I just want to echo everything you said about relationships. But as you were talking about this, I was thinking about two real quick stories. One was again, in my job as a public affairs officer for the Navy, I had a lot of relationships with a lot of national media, one of which was CNN. And we had relationships with the Pentagon where we talked to them whenever we needed to. And I can remember one day when the Navy was operating off of Haiti, there was a ship that went aground off the shore and was within sight of the shoreline. And so one of their producers called me up and said, hey, these guys are saying this ship is aground and we want to report on it. What can you tell us? And I was like, I don't know. So I called my boss at the Pentagon and they said, we don't know either. Tell us what you already know. And then it went back and forth to the point where we were able to come up with a good story that basically said that that's what happened, but the tide was going to lift it off. But it was really interesting to me to talk about relationships where you're in that position where you have relationships both with reporters and with operators, and you have to bring them together. And a quick second story was, in the opposite time, I had a reporter from one of the leading newspapers who was pursuing a negative story on the Navy, but he was going down the wrong direction. And I had to call him and kill the story. And because I had the relationship with them, I was able to, they trusted me and they killed the story. Because it would have been negative, it would have required the Navy to spit out all this other information that wasn't true, and it was attacking a very audible person who did an audible thing, but his motive were being questioned as having to do with racism or something else, which wasn't the case. And so my point is, that as a public affairs officer, you really need to know what those relationships are, or a public relations person, build on those relationships, because like you said, you are often the source, not intentionally, to, funnel that information, or control that information in a way that helps everybody. So, thank you, Bob.
Yeah, I'll add to that. Journalists too, and no offense to former journalists over here, but they tend to want stories that have like a little bit of drama, so doom and gloom. Sometimes it, gets more readership. So I understand. Oh, yes. But when I worked in real estate for the Realtors Association as the marketing director, constantly local journalists wanted to hear about, the sky is falling, like the real estate market's collapsing. But even when we had strong numbers, they didn't want to report on that. So it's good to be proactive and send journalists as soon as you have some facts, whether it's statistics or quips that could be traced to a source, to the journalists in advance. I think that helps. It kind of helps set the precedent, like these are the facts, so I can't really spin my story. It's just a little self-protection you can do.
It's frame, is that?
Yes, yeah.
And if you frame it and give the reporters enough so they have a story, they're going to back off. And they'll cover what they can in that time. And if they have a good relationship with you, they know, all right, there's another story coming, and when she's got it, she's going to give it to me. But there's a level of trust in the relationship too. When you have that good relationship, you can say, hey, wait, there's more coming, just hang with me. Or when they do go down the wrong track and they start asking you questions, say, listen, none of that can actually be validated right now, but here is a story. You have to be ready as the PR practitioner to kind of move it and change it. Not share the truth, but you have to give them what you know is true at that time. And you might not have all the information yourself yet, and you're caught on a phone call, or just someone walks up to you in the street, and you've really got to slow down and think about, what can I share right now? And we are in the age of someone is always recording. Be ready. Someone's always recording, and they may catch you on a hot mic, and you don't even know you're on a hot mic. So you have to be ready for that. Less is more.
And assume all mics are hot.
Yes, absolutely. All the time.
Yeah. They caught Reagan on a hot mic, and it almost started World War III.
There you go.
So I'm going to throw a quick curveball, because it seems like the energy in the room's a little low, and we've been talking about some pretty serious things. So how about this? You can answer one or both. Either what you really dig about PR, or what you would tell a student who's unsure about what kind of career they might want to enter. And if we want to make it a little more about storytelling, we can do that. I'll go first, because that'll give you a second to think. I threw this at you out of nowhere. What I dig about PR and what I would tell a student, they're the same basic thing. If you like becoming an expert on a lot of different topics, if you like the written word, if you like learning every day, then you'll never run out of things to do in public relations or any type of marketing or communications career. There are a lot of different specialty areas as well, so you can emerge from the program at Coastal. You don't have to be a PR major. I wasn't a PR major, and there are many people who are English majors, sociology majors, psychology majors, in English, history that go on and become great marketing and communications people. But the willingness to learn, the ability to write, and to think on your feet, those are key traits that might help you succeed in this career. So, anybody else, whoever else wants to go?
I'll go first. All right. So I'll answer the second question, because one of the things that drew me to PR was the crisis side of it. You should think about everything that happens on this planet. There's always a crisis happening every day. And that's what inspired me to the PR direction, because I remember my first assignment when I was working as a PR manager for Mission for Essential Drug and Supplies was to recall a product that has already been circulated to the market. These are like medicine that had already been expired. Now you can imagine like, you're going to know the people who work in that organization, and then you have to think about, okay, who is the right person to talk to, and connecting the dots, telling the CEO what to say to the media and things like that because of the recall. So that is what drives me. Like the fact that there are so many crises on this planet, it inspires me to continue to like reminding myself I made the right choice when I was choosing a career in PR, and that's why I switched actually from journalism to PR, because journalism was more like, I didn't, people are different, but I didn't like the limelight or that journalism comes with. Like, if for example, I'm pretty sure almost everyone in Myrtle Beach knows you because of your journalism career. But now I wanted to be on the back side of things, like making organizations look good and, good in an ethical way. So that's one of the key things that drove me to PR. So if you love writing, just like Bob mentioned, because you cannot get into PR or even journalism if you don't love writing. Like writing is part of what you do. And you have to be a really good storyteller, because for a journalist to pick your story, they need to see the value in that story. If it doesn't have any value, especially to the public, then it becomes difficult for them to pick that story. So love writing, choose something that is going to keep you awake or inspire your mind to keep on thinking, and you are in the right career, because there's a lot of crisis that happens on this planet.
I would definitely agree with what James said, especially with the crisis component. And if I'm being honest, I like control. Control in my life, I like it. How do we control in PR? We control the narrative. On the journalism side, it was great, and I loved being a storyteller, but you still get that in PR. But you're controlling the narrative, you're controlling the story that the media gets, but you can also give them a really good story, and I like that piece of it. I also like the fact that when you are working for an organization in the crisis piece, I like seeing the calm in the storm, because as a PR practitioner, you can't freak out. You have to be calm, cool, and collected, and calm your client down to say, it's okay. We've got this. We've got a message. We know what we're going to do. We've got a plan. And you get to be that person that they turn to when they're worried, right? Because they're in a bad spot, and now they've got to be honest and transparent with society, and you get to help them do that. And there's a little bit of a rush that you get from that. So I'll say it out loud. I like control.
I would say, and I say this about the communication in field in general, is it's so versatile, right? Like, you're not becoming accountants, you're not crunching numbers all day long, right? You're doing something different every day, and I love that about PR too. You're fast on your feet. The day is never the same as the day before. To me, that's important. I like dynamic, life experience. I've worked in PR for a lot of different places. And, I'll say too, it's fun. The human aspect of it, and you get to connect with clients, outside of the office. And maybe if you're working for a brand, you're going to have a brand launch party, right? And it might be celebrities. You never know, right? It depends what aspect of PR you go into. But it can be very fun and glam and different. And it's not what, the day-to-day office job looks like. And to me, that was super important.
I'm very fortunate that I get to tie this up, because everybody said something that I agree with a great deal. The reason I got into public relations was because I liked telling stories. And I want to second the idea that everybody said needed to be a good writer, because that really is where it starts. Being able to put your thoughts down on paper or on a screen and be able to think through them, really important skill to have. The other thing that I really like, particularly about when we teach our student agency, is we have a lot of people that come to us with a lot of need. They know where they want to go, but they don't know how to get there. And when I bring students along with me and we decide to figure out how to get these people where they need to go, Angela was very fortunate and handed me a client yesterday who has a great idea, probably going to make a lot of money, but had no idea how to get from A to Z. And so our students ask some questions, and that's going to be one of our projects this semester. And by the end of the semester, if he does and we work together, he will have a really great business plan that he'll be able to implement by the end of the semester. And that's really rewarding for me. It's really rewarding for me to see you as students not only meet your goals, but exceed your goals and do something really worthwhile that makes a big difference for others. It's a really good place to exercise your desire, your altruism, your desire to do something good for someone else by using your skills. And the more you do it, the more confident you get into it. And pretty soon, you're the expert, right? You're the lawyer that they call up in the middle of the night. You're the accountant that they call up for their figures. Those are two different careers, but it's the same principle. You are the consultant, which is a lot to what Candace was just saying. So, yeah, I love this job, and I also like the fact that what you just said, everything's new.
Yeah.
If I sat down and listed all the things that I learned, all the things that I've done for clients over the years, it's amazing. And some of them are successful, some of them are not, some of them make a different choice, but it's really neat. And if you're someone who wants to learn new things every day, this is the place to be.
And at the end of the day, if you like relationships, it's the perfect industry for that. And that's probably my other favorite thing, is just getting to know people and helping them and the relationship.
Yeah, I really like what Jeff's doing in the class and in my campaigns class and some of our other classes. Students can almost use the class like an internship, so it can go on your resume. I had a campaigns class last semester that the student projects were really successful, and one of the last classes we worked together to create the bullet points they could put on their resume, because only 2 of the students had ever had internships. And so I'm like, this class was basically a 15-week internship. And I know your class is like that, and we also have other classes that are like that. It's a really getting students as much hands-on as we can, which is super beneficial.
We do also have traditional internships, not to take away from that as well.
Jeff, as the person who, Jeff, this is Jeff's, since I was
Okay.
as the person who's been on the panel who has chronologically been around PR for the longest.
That's true.
Can you tell us what motivates you to stay in the field, either as a practitioner or teacher, and what students interested in entering the field should expect to you?
Well, let's see. Let me go from the expect part to sort of answer the other parts of that question already. My gray hair should tell you a few things, one of which is that it's hard work. Public relations is not something to be trifled with. You should have the perspective when you go to work doing public relations that you have someone else's future in your hands. Whether it's a company, whether it's an individual, whether it's a not-for-profit, you are being trusted with the responsibility of making other people successful. The reason you're going to do that is because you are trained, you know what you're doing, you have done it before, and you're willing to do it again. You also have to cultivate empathy, which James was talking about. You have to put yourself in the position of the people either you're talking to or the people who are talking to you to talk to other people. So those are 2 things that I would really cultivate if you haven't done that already, is an idea of readiness and an idea of empathy and knowing to use the right language, the right points, the right nuances. To Candace's point, but to your point also, the CEO knows what he wants, he just doesn't know how to say it, right? And so as a PR person, you want to be in the room with them, and you also want to be outside the room with the people that they're going to talk to. I always describe public relations as 1 foot in the business or 1 foot in the not-for-profit and 1 foot out in the field. We call our audiences in public relations stakeholders, meaning they all have a stake in the success of the company or the organization, and each one of them is in there for a different reason. So you have to decide what is their stake and what's going on, and how do I communicate with them in that language. That would be how I'd answer that question.
Thank you. And the only downside is that for the rest of your life, if you go into public relations and you tell family members what you do, they'll never understand. They'll never fully get it, unless they happen to work in PR. Confirm that they might. So we have about 20 minutes left. I would love to open it to questions. What do you all think?
Yeah.
I'm sure my colleagues would love questions. Shout out, raise your hand.
As this is just for the whole group. As PR practitioners, how do you guys handle situations as egregious as, for example, Harvey Weinstein, Donald Trump, Michael Vick? How do you guys communicate with the public about those kinds of situations? What they have incriminating evidence, things like that. I mean,
I guess it would depend on who you worked for in that moment and what information legally you can release. It's going to depend on who you're working for and how you shape and craft messages. And if it's under investigation, there's going to be limitations on what you can release anyway.
I think in my case, just to echo what you just said, I think it all depends on how much information can you share. And I think it's always important especially when you're talking to the media, because the mic is always hot. To always make sure that you're using phrases that, as of now, this is what we already know. If you get other information, we'll share with it like in future. In as much as there's incriminating evidence, then you also have to think of what is there to be shared to the public. Because it may be, yes, information is there, it's incriminating, but there may be some, laws that are tied to the information that you can share with the public.
In the relationship with law enforcement in that case too. And you might be in a situation too where your own organization that you're a part of is currently part of an investigation, and in that moment you're probably not going to be able to say anything.
Yeah, I would add that while crises are happening, as a PR practitioner, you're working with other parts of this company. So if a big crisis hits, you're going to be working with the CEO, the chief financial officer, chief operations officer, the legal team's going to be involved. There's going to be a lot of people coming together to talk about depending on the level of the crisis, there could be big spectacle and people want more information. But in some of the cases that you mentioned, the justice process has to play out. Like, everybody will have sides, they'll have opinions, and there'll be legalities about what they can say. But it's not like you're cast in a spotlight without other people's advice, opinions, etc., on how to approach those. So there is nuance to it. But that's a great question.
Honestly, there are days when you just have to go home and take a shower. I don't know how else. Right, this thing that's happened that people misbehave. I think the biggest position you have to advocate for is fair treatment. If someone's guilty, they're guilty, and they deserve justice, and that's fine. But at the same time, you don't want to get in this position where you're saying things that are untrue or are unconfirmed. One of the things that James and I share in crisis communications is that little bit at a time. You can't release anything that's not already confirmed. When you do that, you get in a lot of trouble. And if I had some time, I'd tell you the CNN coal mine story, but I could tell you that at a different time if you'd like to hear about it. But the point is that you have to realize where you are in that situation. And to Candace's point, you're communicating what you know, and you're communicating in a way that advocates for your client, but doesn't supersede or take over the need for justice or the need for retribution or the need for making people whole again.
Yeah.
I have a question for Dr. Howell. Can you talk more about the transition from being a reporter to doing PR? Was it as seamless as you thought, or was it a little bit kind of...
It was a little bit too seamless. It kind of made me nervous, honestly. So I was working at WPDE. I had finished my master's degree in marketing and PR. And because of the relationships, you guys, that I had with so many sources and so many businesses and organizations in the community, I had somebody approach me. It was actually Lakewood Camping Resort, oceanfront, $1 million resort down in the Surfside area. I had their GM at the time, who was good friends with the GM of the TV station that I was working for. He was looking for a marketing director and a PR director, and he asked me for coffee. And we went, we had coffee. I'd known him from being around the station and different events in the community. And he just said, well, I'm just going to cut to the chase. And he slid a piece of paper across the table, and it had a job description when I flipped it over and a salary, and I almost fell out of my chair and spilled my coffee because it was double what I was making in news, you guys. So that transition for me, and I was interested in crossing over. My contract was up at WPD. It was before I started doing contract work at WMBF, before they went on the air. And so I remember going home and talking with my boyfriend at the time, who I later married. And he was like, well, why not? And I said, well, I don't know. I've been in news and I know I can do this. I know I'm ready. And he said, well, you're not going to know until you try. And so I said, yes. And sometimes you just got to take a leap of faith, and just listen to your gut. Your gut is always going to steer you in the right direction. If you get a bad vibe, listen. But that was a great opportunity. And it came because I had a good relationship. And when you have good relationships with people, they'll throw your name out into the field. Thanks. Yeah, you're welcome. It was a really fun job, too.
This is for everyone. Like, when it comes to resume building, what's like your best advice to kind of build your resume, like, independently, like, outside of an internship? What'd you say?
Get published.
get published.
Get published however you can.
Yeah.
Any third-party validation of your writing is going to be golden. And people who sit across from you for an internship interview or a job interview are going to look like us. And out in the world, there's a general idea that young people don't read and write, and you're just on your phones all the time. So if you have on your resume, I wrote this article for blah, 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 and that you have a copy of it that you take with you, the person's going to zero in on that. They're going to see that, and that's going to place you above everybody else that doesn't have that. So get published however possible.
And that includes, I'm sorry,
No, go ahead. I was just going to say, you go.
blogs,
You go.
blogs, websites, and anything electronic that is put out for public consumption.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Like
Okay.
a digital, portfolio goes a long way. If you can link to some actionable work, even if it's what you're doing in a classroom, I guarantee you you're light years ahead of some older executives, right? Who don't know how to digitize work or haven't dabbled in, as much you have electronically, right? Or internet savvy, social media metrics, right? If you can even do like some freelance work for any local business here, like handling their social media, you can report on metrics, like growing their following, right, by X amount. Even that doesn't require a formal internship or a formal job. So there's things you can do just to build yourself up. You're telling your own brand story.
I would tell you to get involved at campus, get involved here, because what that shows me as a potential employer is that it's not just about your academics, you're also engrossing yourself in what's happening on campus and getting involved, and then you can do those things, get involved with social media and other aspects. I just like to see that someone could do more than one thing, because it tells me that you're versatile, whether you're involved in athletics or clubs or anything like that, sororities, fraternities. It shows leadership too, and I think that's really important, just being involved.
And I would also say keep a track of everything that you're doing, especially if it's anything that doesn't have to do with your internship. If you write something, make sure you put a record of it, maybe somewhere on your computer or in your iPad, because that is going to help you when, let's say, I wake up one day and I call you and ask you, can you send me your resume? And you haven't updated it in like 3 or 5 months. It becomes difficult for you to put all things together within a very short period of time. And we are in the field of communication, so people, that is going to communicate something where they tell me, I'll send it tomorrow, I'll send it, I don't know, I'm busy with classes and things like that. People interpret that as someone who's not ready. And as a PR practitioner, as a journalist, you always have to be ready, especially when you're asked to do stuff.
The other thing I'd add to that is when you're doing what James just said, put some numbers behind your bullets. How many people have I served? How many viewers did I get? How many people read that particular article? How often did my stuff appear? Anything that gives me numbers as a resume reviewer tells me that you know the value of your time and you know the value of the dollar that you're getting paid, or even if you're not going to get paid. And that's really important, because I've had people that I've hired that are really good, but they take forever to get something done. And the way public relations in the agency business works is you're billed by your hour. So if you're spending 6 hours on a project that should take you 30 minutes because you don't respect your time, I've got to go build a client for that much money, they're never going to hire me again. And so the point is, build that idea of recognizing numbers as something that's important in a way that we measure productivity, and measure your own productivity in that way. So,
And use the faculty that you're learning from to your advantage when you are ready to build that resume. Sometimes it's not about what you know, it's about who you know. So having really good references is also going to be very important. And if a faculty member is willing to vouch for you, or a staff member, you're going to have references at some point anyway. They're going to call and ask about you. So if we can be there for you in that way, and we can speak honestly about you as a person, that's going to help you get the job.
LinkedIn too.
Yeah.
Yes, maybe we can plug PRSC right now as well. So as mentioned earlier, we do have the Public Relations Student Society of America that we have recently formed. If you go on Coastal Connection, you can submit a request to join, but all are welcome. There is a small dues membership, but it's a pre-professional organization that gives you access to a ton of jobs, networking events. It really looks great on resume for anyone who's going to be working in the PR field post-graduation. So we highly recommend getting involved. And now's a great time to do it, as we're a new chapter. There's already been a lot of interest, and we're excited about it.
Yep.
Say that students don't realize how awesome they actually are.
Yeah.
There's probably a lot of people in the room that have very esoteric interests. If you just started a website, go buy a website for $10, buy a domain name, start a website, talk about the thing that you like. It could just be a glorified blog. If you like some kind of fishing that's only here in South Carolina, you'd be surprised, how many people like that same thing. So you'll get people reading. And then, to Dr. Ranta's point and some of the others, you can show, I grew this website from 0 readers to 10,000 readers. That's also going to show your creativity, because you created something from nothing, which is the highest order critical thinking skill, and maybe the person sitting across from you is going to have a similar interest. And so you're showing creativity, you're showing numbers, and you don't have to leave your bedroom to do that. You should all today buy your domain name if it's available, start your website, start writing on LinkedIn. There's so many things. None of those things I just mentioned require you to be anywhere. It's just a little bit of extra work that can differentiate you from other people.
So,
Other questions, thoughts, ideas?
Is there anything that y'all like learn to push that you never learned from like a teacher, or rather you had learned like being actually like out in the field, like being a PR, being a journalist? So is there anything that to learn about your experiencing without then someone thought
Tons.
Yeah. I forget.
Yeah, everything, maybe tons of stuff. Yeah.
Things to do and not do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you learn through mistakes too. I was working at PR in Chicago. I remember one of the first taboos I did. I pitched the same exclusive story to 2 different outlets. The exclusive Sun News. It's like, it's an exclusive. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute. When they both covered it. But you know what? Learning this, right? Like, and I ended up having a really great relationship with some of the key journalists at the Tribune, and it all worked out. But, sometimes you make a snafu, but you learn from it.
To Angela's point. To Angela's point, do not be afraid of mistakes. Do not be afraid of failure. Embrace what you learn from it. And the second part was just be a sponge. When you get to your new job, be a sponge. Learn as much as you can about everything that everybody's doing, because every organization has its own nuances, has its own language, has its own jargon, has its own way of doing things. And the quicker you learn that, the quicker you're going to be more useful. And that's the goal.
I think one of the biggest things I learned, both on the journalism side and the PR side, it's helped me, but it hurt in the beginning, is that you can't trust people you think you can trust. You have to be a little bit guarded. You have to remember that you trust yourself first, and then everything else will come. But you just have to understand that other people have motivations that are not always good. Their intentions are not always good, and they're going to go for themselves before they go for you. So just be careful. When you form a relationship with someone, that's why the boundary is there, so that you make sure that you're protecting yourself, protecting your organization, but also you can still do the job. But I learned relationship building and how to massage those relationships over time, and I learned a lot of hard lessons with people I thought I could trust, that I learned the hard way, that, okay, all right, well, noted, won't do that again, but own it. If you make a mistake, own it. Use it. It's fuel.
I also think there's a high chance that if you're getting a job, there's someone who used to work in that job before you. So build those relationships with them, and just to get a good feeling of what does it mean to be in this job, what does it take to succeed, and what are some of the things that I need to be aware of, especially if you're working in a big organization. Maybe the CEO doesn't like PR people, and you're going to be working with the CEO because you're the person that they need to talk to anytime they need to talk to the media. So knowing that person who used to work there before you, or even someone who has been in that organization long enough to know the history of the organization. If there's a huge turnover, that should tell you something when you join that organization. So all these, be curious to learn more about the organization that you're getting onto. Because that is, you cannot learn that from your teachers here, but you can learn it from the people who have worked in that organization for long, or the person that you're replacing in that organization. And you may be lucky, actually, the person you're replacing, maybe they just got promoted to a higher level, so you have a bridge to talk to them, and it becomes easy for you to handle that job.
Yeah, or you're just left to sink or swim, and you have to ask questions, right? You have to spend time with everyone in the organization. Because I've been in that role too, where you have to just figure it out on your own. And it will be trial and tribulation, but talk to as many people in the corporation they can.
I would add to get to the, you all don't have to think about this for a bit, but to get to the highest levels of PR, to reach that executive level, you have to almost have an MBA level understanding of business. And that's what I got on the job, talking to CEOs and learning the business. If you know you want to go into corporate-based PR, then I would pick your favorite public company and read 10 press releases they put out. Read their annual report, see if it makes sense to you and what parts don't make sense to you. These kind of things become second nature once you're on the job. Eventually, the business people in the room will expect that you know as much about business as they do.
Yeah.
And so, it's a skill set that we don't spend as much time on clearly as somebody who's getting a business degree, but you're expected to know that kind of thing. Other thoughts, questions?
How many of you guys are people watchers? You like to watch people. You'll love this industry then, because it is always about reading the room, understanding the narrative, and just watching people's mannerisms. It's an interesting field.
Yes, you're almost like a spy. You have to read the room pretty quickly.
Also, something else that I want to mention is when you join an organization, don't try to change everything that you found there. Maybe joining the PR team or maybe becoming the PR manager. And this is something that I learned from my own mistakes. I went to an organization and I wanted to change like the entire branding of that organization because it wasn't resonating well with the people outside. And I had to get a buy-in from the people who work in that organization before we go outside. So it was a huge challenge for me. So don't go there and then try to change everything. If it's a change, just, do it gradually. It's like maybe fix the logo, fix the tagline of that organization, and then start building on that instead of just going there and try to overhaul everything. Because just as you know, people don't like change. And that's the nature of human beings. So if you go into an organization and you proposing these changes, the first thing people are going to be asking is, who is this guy? Where is he from? And you don't want to be that guy where people are asking those kind of questions, especially when you are like a new hire in an organization. So learning the process, learning to, taking time to learn the personalities in that organization helps a lot.
Questions, thoughts, ideas? Okay,
So a question about.
Yeah, we do.
What was your first job out of college?
My first job was a Navy officer.
I worked for a public relations company in Chicago called Rocket Ranch Productions. They owned nightclubs, bars, restaurants. It was amazing. And it was so fun. We had like liquor launch parties after work, celebrity appearances. It was pretty cool, but it was exhaustive and it was a lot of work. You'd be in the office all day and then you'd be out late at night doing the client work, also having a little fun. But I got that out of my system, so.
I was the assistant promotions manager of a TV station in Rochester right before I got the job here in Myrtle Beach across the street at WPDE as a reporter. But that job helped me get the job here in Myrtle Beach.
My first job was a business reporter, and I enjoyed writing about business and learning about rebranding and just having fun. And then I later quit and joined PR side of things, which I enjoyed.
Awesome.
You didn't tell us what you're for.
Yeah.
I barely remember.
Oh, come on.
Definitely. I went to grad school after grad, so a little later. I worked for a company called Airline Reporting Corporation. So when you used to have to get paper airline tickets, and it had a number on it that was a control number, and these different groups of people would scam the airline by what's it called?
Fortune.
Yeah, they when they make fake versions.
Oh, okay.
They would make fake versions and then advertise in the back of the newspaper like a flight to London for $200, and people would buy those tickets, and then they would go to the airport and it was costing the airlines hundreds of millions of dollars a year. So I was on this team of people who had all the archives from all the airlines, and we had to go in and look at all the applications because some of them were fake travel agencies, and we had to identify the worst abusers so that they could be caught before they scammed again.